This is going to be 5 of my top JavaScript tricks, tips, and sort of just features of the language that a lot of people don't know about, but are actually super useful. So with that said, let's get right into it. First is going to be generator functions. So a generator function is basically just a standard function, but we can call it multiple times, and with each time that we call the function, what's going to happen is it's going to resume execution from where it left off, and we can sort of tell it where to pause from the previous execution. So to show you how this works, we have a generator function here, and the way we say this is going to be a generator function is we add the asterisk after the function keyword. So it's function star, and then we can use this yield keyword. So what yield does is just like return, it returns out some value, but then it pauses execution. So the next time we use this generator, we're going to continue from where we yielded. So the first time we would yield 1, and then the second time that we call the generator, we would end up logging out after 1, and then we would yield 2. So to show you how we actually use the generator, so first of all, we call the generator function, which returns a generator object, which is basically just an iterator. So we have our generator, and then we can go ahead and we can log out generator.next. So I'm going to run this, and you can see we log out this object with the value of 1 and done as false. And then we could do this again. So we can log out another one. And now you can see the second time we also log out after 1. And then we get the value of 2 as well as done is still false. If we get one more generator.next, now we would have undefined and done is true because we did finish the function. And now generators can be used for a variety of things, but one of the coolest use cases is for actually creating unique identifiers. So let's delete this code here, and we can say maybe let ID equal 1. And what we're going to do is each time we call the generator, we are going to create a new ID that's incremented. So we can just say while true. So this is never going to be done. And what we're going to do is every single time we call this generator, we are going to yield a new ID that is 1 higher than the previous one. So we can say yield ID plus plus. And all this is going to do is, just like I said, each time it's going to yield this ID, and then it's going to increment it so that the next time we have a higher ID. So you can see we log out 1, 2, then 3, and this will just allow us to keep creating unique identifiers. Now, this isn't the only use case for generators, and these aren't all of the functionalities of generators either. So I'm going to link in the description some more information if you want to read more about generators. But now let's move on to the second trick. Okay, so trick number 2 is sort of a two-parter. So we have optional chaining, and we have the Nullish Coalescing operator. So here we have this user, so this is going to be an object. We have some properties, so we have is subscribed is set to false. By the way, if this is you, make sure that you do fix this and go ahead and subscribe. And then we have some interactions, so we have a comment of great video and like is going to be true. And then we also have this method say hello that just returns hello. And down here we are logging out user.interactions.comment, and we log out the result of user.sayhello. And you can see we get great video and we get hello. But what would happen if, say, this user had no interactions? Well, now we would end up with an error message because we tried to read comment from user.interactions, but user.interactions is undefined, so undefined.comment throws an error. So the way we can solve this is with optional chaining. So we can say question mark dot, and essentially all this does is it says if this previous thing was undefined, then just make this undefined instead of throwing an error. So now you can see we get undefined, but of course if we put this back, we would still have great video. So that's just a super useful way to not have to do some if check to make sure that that value actually exists. Instead, you can just use the optional chaining operator. And we can also use this for function calls. So if say hello was not here, you would see we get an error message because we try to call say hello, but say hello does not exist. So we cannot invoke the function of undefined. But what we can do is before we try to call the function, we can use question mark dot. So this is saying, call this function, but only call it if it actually exists. If this is just undefined, then just continue and don't do anything. So now you can see we would log out undefined, but if we put say hello back, we would log out hello. And now I want to show the Nullish Coalescing operator as well, which allows us to add a default value. So we can say console.log, and let's do user.isSubscribed. We can log this out, and you can see we log out false. But what would happen if we got rid of this? Well, we would end up with undefined, but maybe we want some default value. And the way we can do that is by using 2 question marks, and then after that, the default value. So we can say the default is false. So this is going to be false, as well as if we uncomment this out, we still get false, but then we could maybe change this to true because you just subscribed, and now we get true here. And of course, if we comment this out, we would go back to false. Next, I want to show destructuring. So we still have our same user, but now we have this function called log user, which takes in a user, and it's going to console.log user.isSubscribed, as well as user.interactions.comment. And you can see this is just taking up a lot of space. It's kind of ugly. You could imagine this function might use these values a lot. So it would be annoying to have to keep calling it as user.interactions.comment. And instead, we want to just be able to say comment. So the way we can do this is by using destructuring syntax. So there's a few ways we can do it. So first of all, what we could do is we could say const, and then we open up curly braces to destructure an object. So we can say is subscribed as well as interactions, and we can set this equal to user. So now instead of using user dot, we can remove this, and we can remove this as well, and we can run this, and we can see we get the same result. But we can actually go one step further. So instead of just getting interactions, we can just get the comment from interactions because we don't actually need like in this case, we're not using it. So the way we can do that is we can just destructure this as well by adding the colon and then another set of curly braces and just what we want from interactions, which is going to be the comment. And now instead of interactions.comment, we can just use comment. We can run this, and again, it's going to work the same way. But then we can even go one step further, because we don't need the entire object here. We never actually use user other than to get these values. So what we can do is we can actually destructure in our parameter. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it into our parameter like this. I'm going to remove this line, and we can put this on multiple lines if we want, just to be able to see it all. And now it's going to once again do the same thing, but we never create that user variable at all because we just destructure the parameters. And now destructuring also works with arrays. So what you can see we have here is this array 1, 2, 3, 4, and we destructure the first two values and we give them names. So on the left-hand side of the assignment operator, we put what looks like another array, and we just give it names. So we get first and second, which is going to be the first and the second value from this array. And you can see we log out first comma second, and we get 1 and 2. We could also use a rest operator here. So we could do, for the third one, we could get the rest, and then we could log out rest, and that's going to be an array of the values we didn't destructure. And we can also use destructuring for a sort of cool trick, and that's to swap two variables. So let's say we have let x, and we can set x to be 5, and we can say let y, and we can set y to be, let's say, 10. And what we can do is we can use destructuring to swap these two values. So we can open up this destructuring and say we have x and y, and we can set this equal to a new array with the values y and x. So essentially what we've done is we created a new array with y and x, and we destructured it, and we set the values in x and y, but this is in backwards order from what we had before. So essentially what this does is it swaps the two values. So we can say console.log, and let's say x is, and x is going to be x, and then we can say console.log, and we can do y is, and we can add y, and we can see that now x is 10 and y is 5 because we used this destructuring syntax to swap two variables. This can be really helpful for things like when you're handling linked lists and you have some pointers that you might need to swap, you can use this syntax. Okay, so next I want to look at some debugging, and I want to show some ways we can use console.log that you might have never seen before. So first of all is going to be console.time. So what this does is it creates a timer, and then we can call console.timeEnd to end that timer and log out how long it took. So this can be a good way to sort of quickly measure performance of a function and to make sure it's not taking too long. So you can see here we're just iterating from 1 to 10,000. And you can see every time I refresh this, it updates how long in milliseconds that took. We can also give this a tag. So you can see this as default here, but we could change the tag. So I could say maybe hello, and then we could add the tag of hello here as well to make sure that they match. We can run this and you can see now we get hello over here. And this is just useful if you have multiple timers and you need to make sure you know which one is which. Next, we have something called console.count. So what this does is every time you run this function, it increments by 1 and it logs it out. So in this case, we logged out 10,000 different times, and we can also give this a tag. So we could say maybe hello here, and now it would have a tag just like before. So if we need different counters, that's what we can use. We can also reset this if we wanted. So we could say console.count reset, and this would reset our count. So if we did hello, then all we're going to do is get a bunch of hello ones because each time we log out hello and then we reset that count. Next, there's also console.trace. So what this does is it just prints out a stack trace. So you can see we have my function here. Inside of it, we have nested, and then we call console.trace, and we call both of these functions. You can see in our output in the console here, you can see the stack trace of how we got there. So we started in nested, and then we were in myfunc, and then anonymous is just our sort of top level. So we were in myfunc, and then inside of nested, and we can get the line numbers here as well. So inside of nested, we were on line 3, and then line 5, and line 7 is where we actually called myfunc. So that would be right here. And now we have console.table, which just logs out a table with whatever data you gave it. So if you have a 2D array, or if you have an array of objects, this is a really good way to visualize that data. So here we have an array, and each value in the array is an object. So this one has the name of YouTube and the URL of youtube.com. And this one has the name of frontend expert and the URL of frontendexpert.io/Connor. Make sure to go to that URL, by the way, if you're studying for your front-end interviews. And you can see over here in the console, we create just a table with that data. So we have the name and the URL, which is going to be the property values in the objects, are going to be the names of the columns. And then we have the data inside of it, as well as we get this index, which is just the index in the array. And now as a quick bonus for debugging, I wanted to show the debugger statement because for whatever reason, I don't see it used too often, but it's actually super useful. So if you just add this debugger line anywhere in your code, then you run the code in the browser, it's going to pause at that line of code and create a debugger for you. So here we have it after setting num equal to 5. And you can see in the browser here, it shows us what line it's on. And we can see down here the scope where we have our num as 5 and other is still undefined because we have not gotten to that line of code yet. So this is just a really useful way to debug your code. And just like any other debugger you might have used, you can sort of step through the code to see it one line at a time. So now we set other to 10, and you can see other is now 10 here. Okay, so next we have enums, and enums aren't an official feature of JavaScript. They are actually in TypeScript, but we can use objects like enums. So here we have this check status function, and it takes in a status, and then it switches on that status with 3 different cases, case 1, 2, and 3, each doing something else. And you probably see the issue here. What does 1, 2, and 3 even mean? What does a status of 2 mean, for example? And there's not really any good way to know unless we just went and looked at this code, or maybe looked at where these status actually comes from. But if we used good naming conventions, we could figure this out very easily. So what I'm going to do is come up here to the top, and I'm just going to create an enum. So we can say const status, and we can set this equal to an object, and we can create some property names that map to what these values are. So mapping to 1, 2, and 3. So maybe 1 is success. So we can say success is going to be 1. And then we could have failure is going to be 2. And maybe pending is going to be 3. And then instead of case 1, we would do status.success. Instead of case 2, we would do status.failure. And instead of case 3, we would do status.pending. Personally, I think this makes our code much easier to read. It doesn't change it functionally in any way, but it just makes it much easier to quickly parse this. So I can look at this and say, okay, this is our case of success right here. Below that, we have our case of failure. And then below that, we have the case of pending. And I don't have to go digging to figure out what these different cases actually mean. And with that said, that is going to be the last of the tips in this video. Let me know what you thought of this. If you enjoyed it, maybe I'll make another one. And I'll see you in the next video.